Welcome to worship from Nora Unitarian Universalist Church for Sunday, February 21st, 2021. We're glad you're here joining us from Hanska, New Ulm, Mankato, the Twin Cities, Greater Minnesota, and across the country. Next week's service will take place on Zoom. Please contact the Nora office for the information about how to access that service or check our Nora website. The Reverend Dr. Sarah Olberg, Minister Emerita of Nora Church, will be preaching. Friend, I have lost the way. The way leads on. Is there another way? The way is one. I must retrace the track. It's lost and gone. Back, I must travel back. None goes there, none. Then I'll make here my place. The road leads on. Stand still and set my face. The road leaps on. Stay here, forever stay. None stays here, none. I cannot find the way. The way leads on. Oh, places I have passed. That journey's done. And what will come at last? The road leads on. Not like the brazen giants of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that Twin Cities frame. Keep, ancient people, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars, I know the truth that liveth. What though the darkness round me grows, songs in the night it giveth. No storm could shake my inmost drum, while to the rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are ringing. Send friends for shame or undue
Our story today is read by the Reverend Emily Gage from Unity Temple, Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Oak Park, Illinois.
Hi friends. I have a book today called Her Right Foot. It's by Dave Eggers and the art is by Sean Harris. Her Right Foot. You have likely heard of a place called France. If you have heard of France, you may have heard of the French. They are the people who live in France. You may also have heard of something called the Statue of Liberty. Did you know that the Statue of Liberty comes from France? This is true. This is a factual book. One day, a Frenchman named Edouard de la Boulaye had an idea. The idea was to celebrate the 100 years the United States of America had been around by giving them a giant sculpture. So, he convinced another Frenchman, a Frenchman with an Italian last name, to design the sculpture. This artist's name was Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi. Bartholdi designed the statue. He first made very small models of the statue, the sculpture, then larger ones, and finally one that is the one that we know, which stands 305 feet above the water. This final full-sized version was covered with a thin copper skin. The skin is about as thick as 2 pennies. That is not very thick. Here is a rendering of Bartholdi and his team. He had a team. He did not work alone. He did not like working alone, constructing the statue's hand. Notice that the hand is bigger than these men. Thus, they made the statue in many parts. These parts were assembled in New York City. No, wait. First, they were assembled in Paris. Did you know this? Ask your friends and even your teachers if they knew that before the Statue of Liberty was assembled in New York, she was first constructed in Paris. Your friends and teachers will be astounded. They will be impressed. They might think you are fibbing. But you are not fibbing. This really happened. The Statue of Liberty stood there high above Paris for almost a year in 1884. After they assembled the statue in Paris, they took it apart. But we just put it together, the workers said. That is absurd, they said. They said all this in French, the language of the French, as people who appreciate the absurd. In 1885, after they took it apart, they put the parts in 214 crates and put these crates on a boat. The boat was called the Isère. The boat traveled across the Atlantic Ocean and made its way to a city called New York, which is in a state also called New York. Hundreds of workers, perhaps 214 of them, took the pieces out of the 214 boxes, then began to rivet the pieces together. Assembling the statue took 17 months, and it happened on what was then called Bedloe's Island. Bartholdi liked to see the sculpture rise above the harbor. Sometimes he watched the construction from the water. Sometimes he watched it from the land. Usually he was wearing a sturdy black hat, for he, like most European men of the time, favored sturdy black hats. You may have noticed by now that the pictures of the Statue of Liberty in this book have her colored brown. You may have thought that the illustrator of this book was not so good at his job, because we all know that the Statue of Liberty to be a certain greenish blue. But the Statue of Liberty was made of copper, and copper starts out brown. Then, very slowly, when left outside for long periods of time, copper will eventually oxidize, and when it does, it turns this blue-green color. So, the Statue of Liberty that everyone in New York saw being constructed was actually brown. The Statue of Liberty, in fact, was brown for about 35 years. But the statue turned green around 1920, and it has been this color ever since. Perhaps you already knew this. And you may have known that the book the statue is carrying, the one in her left hand, features the date July 4th, 1776, on which the Declaration of Independence was signed. And you may know that the 7 spikes on her crown represent the 7 seas on earth and the 7 continents and the sun rays, too. And you probably know that the torch she carries is a symbol of enlightenment, lighting the path to liberty and freedom. And you might have known that at one point, Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb and the record player, once proposed to have a giant record player inside the Statue of Liberty. He did! He wanted the statue to be able to speak. In the end, though, this idea was considered a bit strange and not pursued. And did you know that the interior of the statue was designed by another Frenchman by the name of Eiffel? That's right, the same Eiffel who, a few years later, would design the Eiffel Tower. And did you know that while the statue was first being constructed in Paris, a bunch of Parisians, mostly writers, they like to eat, actually dined in the area just below the statue's feet? This, too, is true. While the statue was rising, Bertoldi set up a lunch 4 stories up to impress and enthrall these French writers who, being difficult to impress and enthrall, were at least mildly amused. But there is one thing that you might not know, and this is the central point of this book, a point that the author apologizes for taking so long to get to. The point is that even if you have seen a picture of the Statue of Liberty, or many pictures of the Statue of Liberty, or even hundreds of pictures of the Statue of Liberty, you probably have not seen pictures of her feet. And even if you have seen pictures of her feet, you probably have not seen pictures of the back of her feet, in particular, her right foot. What do you notice when you see this picture? That's right. She is going somewhere. She is on the move. Let's pause here and collect ourselves and think about this. Let's discuss this. Let's think about and discuss the fact that this is the largest sculpture in all the land and the most iconic symbol of the United States of America. Let's talk about the fact that this statue has welcomed millions of visitors and immigrants to the USA. People talk about her unusual headgear. They talk about her gown, which is a very heavy kind of garment and would likely result in serious lower back issues. They talk about her beautiful torch and the severe look on her face. But no one talks about the fact that she is walking. This 150-foot woman is on the go. Every time we see the Statue of Liberty in pictures, or any time we imagine the Statue of Liberty, we see her standing still, very still, like, well, a statue. But she is moving. She weighs 450,000 pounds and wears a size 879 shoe, and she is moving. How can we all have missed that? Or even if we saw this and noticed it, how is it that we have seen and noticed a 450,000 pound human on her way somewhere and said, just another 150-foot woman walking off a 150-foot pedestal? And most important, where is she going? Is she going to Soho to get a panini? Is she going to the West Village to look for vintage Nico records? No. She is facing southwest, so she is facing New Jersey. Could she be going to Trenton? Wait, no, she's facing southeast. So she is not going to New Jersey, but she is going somewhere. But where? Why is she moving? There are certain things we know. We know that around her feet are chains. They are broken chains, implying that she has freed herself from bondage. We know that Bartholdi wanted us to know this. He wanted us to see the chains. People have talked about the chains. But few talk about the foot that is so obviously in mid-stride, about the fact that her entire right leg is in mid-stride. What does this mean? What does this mean that we often forget about this right foot, this right leg? Here is an idea. Here is a theory. Here is a reminder. If the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of freedom, if the Statue of Liberty has welcomed millions of immigrants to the United States, then how can she stand still? Liberty and freedom from oppression are not things you get or grant by standing around like some kind of statue. No, these are things that require action, courage, and unwillingness to rest. The Statue of Liberty was not built to welcome just 1,886 immigrants from Italy on one certain day in, say, 1886. No, she was built to welcome 3,000 immigrants from Poland the next day. The next day, 5,000 Norwegians. After that, 10,000 Glaswegians. Then Cambodians, then Estonians, Somalis, Nepalis, Syrians, Liberians. It never ends. It cannot end. After all, the Statue of Liberty is an immigrant too, and this is why she is moving. This is why she is striding. In welcoming the poor, the tired, the struggling to breathe free, she is not content to wait. She must meet them in the sea. The end.
Joy and woe are woven fine, wrote William Blake. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go. Because we daily live the truth in the poet's words, we pause each time we gather to worship, wherever and however we gather to worship, to speak into the embrace of this beloved community, our joys and our sorrows. You may type your joys and sorrows into the comments. You may hold them in your hearts. You may speak them aloud wherever you are, and know that in the mysterious ways of love, we hold them with you. We hold all the joys and sorrows of all who are gathered here in our hearts as we enter a spirit of meditation. The natural world, as if we are not natural. The natural world reminds us again this week that we are not in charge. Great swaths of dangerous winter across the land, cold, ice, snow, and wind. Human planning and engineering failing and fallen. The natural world reminds us again this week that we are not in charge, as if we needed reminding, as if a year of something tiny, all but invisible, sickening us, killing us, driving us into hiding, hadn't been reminder enough. If we become humble, will it stop? All of it? The extremes of weather, new and deadly diseases, eruptions and quakes? If we stipulate to it, okay, we are not in charge and never have been, will God, the fates, all the deities of all the religions, the clockwork of creation then take pity on us? Calm the seas and the skies, slow mutations, block cross-species transmission? Our faith tells us no, that's not the way it works. None of this is punishment for hubris, and neither do God, the fates, all the deities of all the religions, or the clockwork of creation order the world as reward for our obedience, our right thinking. Still, humility may yet save us, protecting our spirits, not completely, but some, enough, against the jolt of disbelief, the rumbling why and how, the naked unpreparedness for the next time life veers wildly, destructively, from not just what we might wish, but from anything we ever imagined could possibly happen. Reminding us of our individual insignificance and thereby inviting us into community, the better to meet whatever comes, mourning together, rebuilding together, rejoicing together. Calling us back into understanding and embracing our rightful place in the natural world, not apart from it. we are not in charge, for which we give thanks, against which we rage, with which we must live. Amen. Because our story was a little longer than usual today, we have just one reading from Unitarian Universalist Community Minister Aisha Ansano. Reflections on the hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a time when particular songs get sung. One of them is Lift Every Voice and Sing. It gets sung in school, in church, and at various MLK Day celebrations or over the course of Black History Month. It's a very, very powerful song, but it's often sung without context, and at times it's sung without a lot of understanding. When you sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing, do you pay close attention to the words? It's easy on a Sunday morning to open the hymnal and sing along without necessarily processing what we're saying, what the words we're saying really mean. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. This song deserves to be sung with attention. It is a song that starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country. And it is a song that should make us uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with the history that it calls upon. Uncomfortable with the fact that the struggle for racial justice continues and has not come quite so far as it should have by now. How can anyone sing the words, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, without a deep, deep discomfort? So when we sing this song, will you join me in singing with intentionality? Will you join me in the deep discomfort that I will be feeling in singing those words? discomfort with the pain and horror that those words refer back to, and discomfort with the fact that those words do not only refer to a distant history, but also to what is happening now? Will you commit to sitting with your own discomfort? And then will you tap into that discomfort and do something? Will you lift your voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty? Here end the readings. Before Sally plays Lift Every Voice and Sing, you'll see 2 slides with the entire lyrics. I appreciate just about everything about this morning's story, Her Right Foot. I appreciate the engineering facts and the historical tidbits. Imagine a giant record player or a luncheon to impress French friends. I appreciate the casual tone of the narration. I appreciate the naming of not just European immigrants, the ones most of us gathered today trace or try to trace our family lines back to the ones who have come to be called by the most racist and xenophobic in our society true Americans, though most of them were not welcomed as such upon arrival, and none of them are indigenous to this land. I appreciate the naming not just of those European immigrants, but also the naming of immigrants from Asian and African countries. I appreciate author Dave Eggers' idea, his theory that liberty comes not from standing around, but by being on the move. I appreciate that this story is factual and true. But no children's book, not even one that's a 10-minute read, can offer all the facts and tell all truths that are to be told, especially perhaps about the United States of America and the people who sought and still seek liberty here. Not to mention the people who inhabited this land for thousands of years before the first Europeans arrived, and the people who were brought here in chains. And we need to tell and remember and learn for the first time, perhaps, all the truths about our country, about liberty, about the myth that everyone here came to these shores seeking a better life and that they found one when they got here. We need to remember and tell and learn, in some cases for the first time, all of the truth, because consequences born of the discrepancy between who we say we are and who we have really been and who we still are, those consequences unfold around us every day. Here in Minnesota, the news brings stories related to the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers at least weekly. If it isn't a story about the planned reopening of the intersection at 38th and Chicago, then it's a story about funding security for the upcoming trial of Derek Chauvin. Across the country and across social media, editorial cartoonists and meme creators are having a heyday with Senator Ted Cruz's Cancun vacation, drawing attention not just to the Marie Antoinette optic of leaving behind millions of freezing, hungry, flooded Texans for a trip to sun and sand, but also to the irony of him crossing a border for safety, for the sake of his children. Even coronavirus news about who dies in greater numbers and who gets vaccinated in greater numbers traces directly back to stories about how we value or disvalue people according to how and when and why they arrived within the borders of what we call the United States. The ways we name or rename our institutions, sports teams, and natural features, the debate over immigration reform, hashtag Oscars so white, the fact that when Kamala Harris was inaugurated vice president, we were left without a single woman of color in the United States Senate, voting rights, the dubious legacy of the late Rush Limbaugh, the list goes on. It is too much to expect that a single picture book, even one that prides itself both on being factual and celebrating the idea of liberty, would delve into all the complexities of the American immigrant experience, as if there were a single experience. Luckily, our world is filled with books. I discovered almost by accident this week a couple books for middle grade readers that managed to tell a bit more of the story from two different but related perspectives. When I picked them up, because I had seen them on one best book for young readers list or another, I didn't realize that both would have truths to offer this morning's sermon. Truths that are simplified because of the age group they're written for, but not sugar-coated completely. Jude, the narrator of Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga, is a young adolescent Syrian girl from a seaside town near Aleppo who immigrates to Cincinnati with her mother, who is expecting a baby. Jude's older brother has run away to join the revolution, and her father stays behind to run his store. Jude and her mother move in with her mother's brother, a doctor, and his wife and daughter, who is in the same grade as Jude. The relative wealth of her uncle's family softens Jude's arrival in a new country, and in some ways her story is a typical starting to come of age story. But Jude's experiences in her English as a second language classroom, alongside students from South Korea, China, and Somalia, her cousin's envy of Jude speaking Arabic with her father, and her friendship with an American-born Libyan classmate whose parents' restaurant suffers a hate crime. All these illustrate some of the harsh realities and mixed blessings that come with being an immigrant. Mia, the narrator of Front Desk by Kelly Yang, arrived in California from China along with her parents a few years before the setting of the book. Her family doesn't have the cushion of a middle-class, well-assimilated relative to soften their arrival. After a series of poorly paid, short-lived jobs, Her parents land an equally poorly paid and precarious gig as caretakers of a small motel owned by a greedy, cheap and cruel Taiwanese American whose son is in Mia's 4th grade class. Mia's 2 best friends are a classmate from Mexico and a middle-aged African-American man who lives in the motel and loses his job when falsely accused of stealing a car. Mia's parents fall into the habit of feeding and putting up for a night or two, free of charge, various down-on-their-luck Chinese immigrants. Men and women who've lost poorly paid job after poorly paid job. Men and women who have been degraded and mistreated by employers and customers. Men and women who've had their passports and IDs stolen or confiscated. Men and women who have been preyed upon by loan sharks. This, too, is a story of mixed blessings and harsh realities. Jude asks her mother about moving to America. I press my face up against the glass and say, American storms are so strong. The wind bends the tree, and there is a hiccup of fear in my chest, but the trees stay strong. We have storms back home, Mama says. Mama always does this. If I say I like something in America, she reminds me we have the same thing back in Syria. I usually ignore her, but tonight it is like the storm is inside of me too, and I am tired of being quiet. Don't you want me to like it here? I am tired of being the tree in the wind that is always pushed but never allowed to fall down. Of course, she says. I walk over to the bed and hoist myself up onto the mattress. Mama wraps her arms around me, pulling me close to her, and she smells like she always has, agarwood oil and rosewater. It is the smell of home, of love, of safety. It is a smell that makes me feel like it is okay for me to say anything. Why did you bring me here? I asked, the same question I am always asking, but I'm never getting a satisfactory answer to. You know why, Habibti, Mama says, and she sounds so tired, and I almost decide to drop it, but then the thunder booms and I feel it in my chest, and I say, it's like you want me to hate it here. Of course I don't. But you always tell me things are better at home. I am scared you will forget. If you didn't want me to forget, we shouldn't have left. Mama takes my face in her hands. She pulls me centimeters from her, and it feels like we are sharing one breath. Don't you see? I know you will have a better life here, but that breaks my heart. You are too young to understand, Jude, but someday you will. Mia also asks her mother about coming to America. Mom, I asked her, why did we come here? Why did we come to America? I repeated. My mother looked away and didn't say anything for a long time. A plane flew overhead and the picture frames on the wall shook. She looked into my eyes. Because it's freer here, she finally said, which didn't make any sense. Nothing was free in America. Everything was so expensive. But Mom, one day you'll understand, she said, kissing the top of my head. Now go to sleep. I drifted to sleep, thinking about my cousins and missing them and hoping they were missing me back. It's a while before something happens that helps Mia understand. But then the real car thief is arrested. My mother and father took a seat at the foot of my bed, and my mother reached for my hand. "Do you still remember asking me a while back why we came to America?" she asked. I nodded. "This is why," she said. "Because here people are innocent until proven guilty. For the most part, at least. That's what you saw tonight." Slowly, my parents started telling me about something that happened in China a long, long time ago called the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was a political movement that took place in China in the 1960s and 70s. My parents said that during the Cultural Revolution, my grandparents were locked up and shipped away. It didn't matter whether they actually did anything wrong. That's why we left, so that something like that wouldn't happen to you, my dad said. Tonight, seeing that police officer arrest Mr. Lawrence and actually coming back here and apologize to Hank, okay, he didn't really want to apologize, but still he did. I know I made the right decision. America may not be perfect, but she's free. And that makes all the difference. I finally understood what my parents meant by free. The Statue of Liberty's welcome to immigrants isn't a lie, but it isn't the whole truth either. Jasmine Warga and Kelly Yang wrote their books out of the experiences of their families, and the conversations between parent and daughter in each point to the part of the story, Her Right Foot, and Emma Lazarus's The New Colossus. Our chalice lighting words this morning don't tell. Many, perhaps even most, immigrants do find a better life here, but it is challenging, often dangerous, and always bittersweet. Friday was the 79th anniversary of Executive Order 9066 that sent more than 100,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, nearly 70,000 of them American citizens, to concentration camps in the wake of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. For the past year, up to and including this month, people stoked into frenzied rage by the former president's insistence on calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus have been and are violently attacking Americans of Asian ancestry. This is why, one of the countless whys, we have to tell the whole story, the welcome and the hatred, the challenge and the opportunity, the freedom and the expense. Actually, we have to tell the whole of several stories. The stories of the peoples already on this land when the first Europeans arrived, and the stories of what happened to them are still happening to them because of the European arrival. The stories that call the first Europeans on this continent by all of their names, including invader, conqueror, wager of genocide. The stories of the people brought here against their will to be used unto death in the building of a country that still treats them as other and a wealth that still eludes them. And the stories of people who came here without documentation or permission, at great risk for safety and a better life. We need to tell and remember and learn, in some cases for the first time, the full truth of all these stories, along with the stories of the kind I've mostly been talking about today, of people who came here willingly or reluctantly, but with documentation and permission, in search of freedom and a better life. Dave Eggers ends his story of the Statue of Liberty with the lines, "In welcoming the poor, the tired, the struggling to breathe free, she is not content to wait. She must meet them in the sea. He understands the relationship between America and immigrants as one of mutual movement. The seekers of liberty move toward this country, and this country moves toward them in welcome. That's the dream, and that's the myth. And maybe someday that will be the reality. But only if we who believe in the dream, who want that myth to become manifest, get on the move, mobilizing ourselves and our communities into truth-telling and reconciliation, reparations and celebration, generosity and openness to change. Stories are one place to start. Telling the stories, comparing and contrasting the stories, noticing the gaps, the double standards, the stacked deck, and not looking away. Sitting with the discomfort the stories generate until we can do no other than take up our piece of the work of transforming our country into the fullness of its possibility and get on the move. Amen.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah, yeah. 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 Oh yeah, yeah.
Please join with me in saying the words for extinguishing our chalice. The flame has been doused. The fire of our community still burns. In this moment, we become beacons on the prairie, bearers of light and warmth, until we gather again to rekindle our communal chalice. With courage and curiosity, answering love's call, let us propel ourselves toward liberty, for the road leads on. Amen.